On Christmas Eve, the snow outside our Aspen villa was falling in soft, heavy sheets, the kind that made the whole world seem quiet, sacred, almost holy. Inside, the fire roared, the tree sparkled with ornaments I had carried from my old house, and the smell of cinnamon filled the air. It should have been a night of peace. Instead, it became the night my heart cracked open. My son-in-law Daniel looked me straight in the eye, his voice as sharp as ice. "The best Christmas gift would be if you disappeared from our family." His words cut through me, but what hurt more was not his arrogance. It was the way my son, Christopher, sat in silence beside him, then slowly nodded. That silent nod was colder than the snow outside, colder than anything I had ever felt in my life. I stood there frozen, clutching the edge of the dining table. The lights from the tree blurred before me, and I could barely breathe. All I had ever done was give. I had sold my home, poured every last dollar of my savings, $1.2 million, into helping them buy this $3 million villa. I thought I was securing their happiness. Instead, on the holiest night of the year, they told me I was nothing but an inconvenience. The room seemed to tilt as their laughter carried on around me, as if they hadn't just ripped the ground from under my feet. My name is Constance Mitchell. I am 68 years old, a widow, and until that night, I believed that sacrifice would eventually be rewarded with gratitude. But that Christmas Eve taught me otherwise. It taught me that even the purest love can be twisted into chains, binding you until you forget your own worth. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. Daniel poured himself another glass of wine and smirked, as though his cruel words had been nothing more than a joke at the table. Sophia, my daughter-in-law, laughed softly, leaning into her husband, my son, as if she were proud of him for letting Daniel speak the truth out loud. And Christopher, my only child, he did not even look at me. He stared into his glass, his jaw tight, his silence louder than any insult. I wanted him to stop this. I wanted him to say, "No, not my mother." But his nod had already betrayed me. His silence had already agreed. The clinking of cutlery, the glow of candles, the faint sound of carolers outside, it all became unbearable noise. I heard Sophia's voice drift through it, talking about how they planned to convert the guest room into a wine lounge, how they had visions of parties, laughter, and endless glasses poured under the twinkling aspen lights. That guest room was mine, the one place in the house I could call my own. And now they spoke of it as if I were already gone, as if I had never belonged at all. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but my throat felt locked. Instead, I gathered the courage to whisper, "Christopher, is that truly what you want?" He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. They were not the eyes of the little boy I raised, not the son who once held my hand on snowy days like this. They were cold, flat, unrecognizable. "Mom," he said quietly, "you gave us what you could. Don't make it harder by staying where you're not needed." Not needed. The words echoed in my skull. I looked around at the house I had helped them buy, the holiday feast I had cooked, the garlands I had hung with shaking hands. Every corner of that villa had a piece of me in it, and yet here they were, telling me my presence was nothing but clutter. The betrayal burned hotter than the fire in the hearth. I thought of Charles, my late husband. He had always told me, "Constance, love your family, but never lose yourself in the process." I had ignored him. I had given more than I had to give, thinking it would make me indispensable. But in that moment, I realized I was disposable in their eyes, like a withered ornament ready to be tossed aside once it lost its shine. The rest of the evening blurred into shadows. Their laughter carried on, talk of gifts and plans for the villa's renovation floating over me like cruel echoes. I sat quietly, tasting the salt of my own tears, though no one noticed. Or perhaps they noticed and simply did not care. I excused myself early, slipping out into the night where the snow still fell heavy and silent. The cold bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the frost in my chest. That night, standing alone under the Christmas sky, I made a silent vow. They thought the best gift was my disappearance. They would get what they asked for, but not in the way they imagined. I would disappear, yes, but when I returned, it would not be as the woman they thought they could discard. It would be as someone they would never again underestimate. I pulled my coat tighter and walked away from the glowing villa, my boots crunching in the snow. The warmth of family had been stripped from me, but a new fire sparked in its place, one of defiance, of clarity. They had pushed me out, but they had no idea what strength still lived within me. Christmas Eve had broken me, but it had also begun to remake me, and I promised myself under that silent sky that this story was far from over. I had thought the cruelty of their words on Christmas Eve was the end of my humiliation, but I was wrong. That night was only the beginning. After Daniel's smirk faded and Sophia's laughter echoed into silence, Christopher finally stood and spoke to me directly. His voice was calm, but it carried a hardness that pressed against me like a blade. "Mom, this is our home now. You contributed once, and we're grateful, but you can't keep clinging. It's time for you to go." For a moment, I couldn't believe he had said it. I had raised this man, held him when he was sick, stayed awake at nights when he was a child trembling from nightmares. And now, in the house I had sacrificed my future to help him buy, he was telling me I no longer had a place. The world seemed to tilt, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they must all hear it. I searched his face, looking for even a flicker of hesitation, a trace of my son's love beneath the frost. But there was nothing. His expression was stone, his jaw set firm. Daniel crossed his arms with a satisfied smirk, as if this had been his idea all along, as if he had finally driven a wedge too deep to remove. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her lips curved into a smile that was anything but kind. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to ask, "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" My voice trembled, but it was steady enough for them to hear. Christopher looked at me as though the question itself was absurd. "Mom, Aspen has plenty of hotels. You'll be fine for a while. We'll figure something out later." I saw it then, the way Sophia's eyes gleamed at the mention of hotels. She was already planning to redecorate, already imagining my room cleared of my belongings. She whispered to Daniel, and though I couldn't catch every word, I heard enough. Wine lounge. They were laughing, right there at the table, about turning my room into a space for their endless bottles, their endless parties. The room where I had kept the last photographs of Charles, the room where I had prayed each night for their happiness. The humiliation burned so hot, my cheeks felt flushed. I rose from my chair slowly, trying to hold on to the last shreds of my dignity. "On Christmas Eve?" I asked, my voice low. "You would throw me out of the house on Christmas Eve?" Christopher didn't flinch. He simply said, "This isn't personal, Mom. We just need space. Please understand." His tone made the word "please" sound like an insult, a formality with no heart behind it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him until he remembered who I was. But instead, I nodded once, a tiny gesture that felt like a surrender, but was really the beginning of something else. I walked past the glittering tree, past the garlands I had hung with my own hands, and went upstairs to gather my things. The laughter followed me. Sophia's voice, light and mocking. "Finally, we'll have the place to ourselves." And Daniel's chuckle, low and smug. And beneath it all, the silence of my son, who did nothing to stop them. That silence cut deeper than any insult they could have spoken. In my room, I packed slowly, my hands shaking as I folded sweaters into a small suitcase. My eyes landed on the family photo taken last Christmas, before everything had soured. We stood together in front of the old fireplace from my former home. Christopher had his arm around me. Sophia smiled brightly. Daniel pretended to look warm, though I had always suspected he hated even those moments. I picked up the photo frame, held it to my chest, then set it face down on the dresser. I could not take it with me. Not now. Downstairs, I could hear glasses clinking, the pop of a champagne cork. They were celebrating my absence. The sound followed me as I carried my suitcase through the hall, my feet heavy, my heart heavier still. When I reached the door, Christopher stood there, his hands in his pockets, blocking the frame of the doorway. For a brief moment, I thought he might stop me, might tell me not to go. Instead, he stepped aside without a word. The cold air rushed in as I opened the door. Snowflakes swirled against my cheeks, stinging like tiny shards of glass. I looked back one last time. The villa glowed behind me, filled with warmth, music, and laughter. But none of it was meant for me, not anymore. I stepped out into the snow and closed the door firmly behind me. Outside, the night was silent except for the distant sound of carolers singing somewhere down the street. Their voices should have been comforting, but to me, they felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked to my car, parked at the edge of the driveway. My breath rose in clouds, and each step felt heavier than the last. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced at the glowing windows one final time. My son was in there, surrounded by people who cheered my absence. And I, the woman who had given up everything for him, was alone in the dark. My hands gripped the steering wheel, cold and stiff. A part of me wanted to drive away forever, to vanish into the night and never look back. But another part, the part that had been awakened by their cruelty, knew this was not the end. I started the engine. The headlights cut across the snow, illuminating the trees that lined the road. My chest ached, but somewhere deep inside, a small spark flickered. I had been cast out, humiliated, and betrayed on Christmas Eve. But I was not finished. Not yet. The tires crunched against the snow as I pulled away from the villa, the glow of its windows shrinking behind me until it was only a faint blur through the trees. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. I had been cast out like an unwelcome guest in a house I helped build. Every mile I drove away felt like another mile cut between me and the son I once thought would always love me. At the edge of Aspen's town square, I parked the car and stepped out into the night. The cold wrapped around me instantly, sharp and biting. But I welcomed it. It matched the chill in my chest. The square was alive with Christmas lights strung across the tall pine tree in the center, ornaments glittering under the glow of lanterns. Families walked by with children tugging at mittened hands, their laughter ringing in the air. Their joy was so bright, so simple, that it pierced through my darkness and made me ache with longing. I stood there for a long time, staring up at the towering Christmas tree, its star glimmering against the black sky. My breath rose in white clouds, and I felt the weight of my loneliness pressing harder. But beneath it, something stirred. I was not just a mother discarded. I was Constance Mitchell. I had spent a lifetime building, giving, enduring. And though they had pushed me aside, they had no idea the strength that still lived in me. My phone was heavy in my coat pocket. My fingers hovered before I finally pulled it out and scrolled through my contacts. One name stood out, Elena Garcia. She had been my friend since Charles passed away, and more than that, she was a lawyer with a sharp mind and a loyal heart. I pressed her name and lifted the phone to my ear. "Elena," I whispered when she answered. My voice cracked with the weight of everything. "They threw me out tonight. Christopher. He told me this isn't my home anymore." There was silence for a moment. Then her voice came, steady and calm, a balm against the storm inside me. "Constance, listen to me. You are not powerless. Do you remember the villa contract we signed together? You didn't just give them money. You secured ownership, 35%. That house is as much yours as it is theirs." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. The words sank in slowly, like embers catching flame. 35%. I had forgotten in the fog of grief and sacrifice, in the way I had handed over my life savings as though they were nothing. But Elena remembered. She had made sure of it. My eyes lifted to the star at the top of the Christmas tree. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of hope. Not hope that Christopher would suddenly love me again, or that Daniel and Sophia would treat me with respect. That hope had died back at the dinner table. No, this was a different kind of hope. The kind that comes from knowing you still have ground to stand on, that you still have power in your hands. "Elena," I whispered, my voice steadier now. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she said firmly. "I have the papers in my office. If they try to push you out, they'll find themselves standing on thin ice. You have rights, Constance. Don't let them forget it." I closed my eyes, the cold air stinging against my skin. 35%. They had wanted me gone, erased as though I were nothing. But the truth was, I was still woven into the very foundation of that villa. Without me, it would never have existed. As I stood there in the square, surrounded by strangers basking in the glow of Christmas joy, a different glow began to burn inside me. For the first time in years, I felt something other than despair or exhaustion. I felt resolve. They wanted me gone, but I would not vanish quietly. I would not be the woman they laughed at as they turned my room into a lounge. I would not be the mother who faded into the background of their wealth. The clock in the square struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the snowy air. I tightened my grip on the phone, pressing it to my chest as though it were a lifeline. That night, under the towering tree of aspen, I made a decision. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had broken me. But I would fight back, not with shouting or begging, but with the truth that could not be denied. I still had ownership. I still had a voice. The snow swirled around me, thick and endless, but I no longer felt lost in it. Instead, I felt as though it carried me forward, pushing me towards something greater. My life had been reduced to sacrifice for too long. That night, I decided I would no longer be the silent giver. I would become the one who decided how this story ended. I pulled my coat tighter and walked back to my car, the lights of the Christmas tree reflecting in the frost on the windshield. For the first time that night I smiled, not from joy, but from certainty. I had been wounded, yes, but I was far from defeated. The next morning, the world outside was blinding white. Aspen was wrapped in snow, as though the night had been washed clean. But inside me, nothing had been cleansed. I woke in a modest hotel room, the kind with beige curtains and a heater that clanked too loudly, and I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My body was heavy from the ache of what had happened, but my mind was alive, sharper than it had been in years. Elena's words echoed in my head, 35%. The number repeated like a drumbeat, steady, undeniable. I brewed the cheap hotel coffee, its bitter taste grounding me, and opened my laptop. It had been years since I logged into my bank account without hesitation, without some new request from Christopher driving me to check the numbers. Now, with my heart pounding, I looked at the balances. One by one, I opened the accounts, and what I saw was exactly what Elena had warned me about. Transfers, withdrawals, credit cards linked to expenses I had never approved, lavish dinners, luxury shopping trips, car payments that were never mine. My heart burned as the list grew longer. They had been draining me dry, not just with words, but with every silent transaction. I picked up the phone and called the bank. My voice did not tremble this time. "This is Constance Mitchell. Effective immediately. I want all joint accounts with Christopher Mitchell and Daniel Harper frozen. No further withdrawals. No further charges. Lock them now." The representative confirmed, her tone polite but curious. To her, it was just another request in a day full of numbers and names. But to me, it was the moment I reclaimed something that had been taken from me. When I hung up, I sat very still, staring at the snowflakes drifting past the window. My heart raced, but it wasn't fear this time. It was exhilaration. For the first time in years, I had taken action. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. Christopher's name flashed across the screen. I let it buzz once, twice, before I answered. His voice was frantic, sharp, without the calm control he had shown the night before. "Mom, what did you do? Our cards aren't working. Daniel's account is locked. What's going on?" I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to the panic in his voice, savoring it like a bitter medicine that finally begins to heal. "I did what I should have done a long time ago," I said softly. "I closed the fountain you've been drinking from. If you want to know why, look in the mirror." His voice rose, cracking with fury. "You can't do this. You're ruining us. Do you understand? You've destroyed everything we've built." My laugh was short, humorless. "Everything you built? Christopher, open your eyes. You built nothing. I sold my house. I emptied my savings. I gave you the foundation, the roof, the walls, the very ground you're standing on. And you repaid me by asking me to disappear." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I heard his breath, heavy, ragged. Finally, he said, "We can't live without that money." The admission struck me harder than any insult, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I had feared all along. My son wasn't just ungrateful. He was dependent, trapped in a life built entirely on my sacrifice. Without me, he was nothing. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle deep inside me. "Then maybe," I whispered, "it's time you learned how to live without me." And before he could respond, I ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was also liberating. For so long, I had been the safety net, the silent provider. They had never seen me as a person, only as a source. But that morning, in that small hotel room, I cut the cords that bound me to their greed. The phone buzzed again, Daniel this time, but I ignored it. I stood by the window, watching the snow drift across the street, and for the first time in years I felt taller, stronger. The woman who had walked out of the villa humiliated was gone. In her place was someone who would no longer bow to their demands. Still, a part of me trembled. This was only the first step. I knew they would fight back, that their anger would grow hotter with each passing hour. But I also knew something else. They had underestimated me for the last time. I turned away from the window, my suitcase still half unpacked on the bed. The Christmas lights from the town square glowed faintly in the distance, a reminder that joy was still possible, even in the coldest season. I pressed my hand to my chest and whispered to myself, "This isn't just about money anymore. This is about respect, about dignity, about finally being seen." The phone kept buzzing, but I let it ring. I would not be their lifeline anymore. I would be the one to decide what happened next. The hotel room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater and the muffled sounds of snowplows outside, clearing the streets of Aspen. I sat in front of the mirror, the kind attached to a wooden desk that had probably been there for decades. My reflection looked older than I remembered, the lines deeper, the eyes more tired. For a long while, I simply stared at myself. The woman who looked back at me was not the same woman who had walked into that villa the night before, carrying pies and gifts, hoping for warmth. This woman was harder now, her shoulders squared, her eyes rimmed red, but glowing with something fierce. I touched the glass, tracing the outline of my face. "What have you become, Constance?" I whispered to myself. My late husband's voice seemed to echo in the silence, the way it sometimes did when I needed him most. Charles had always warned me, "Don't let your love for others become a chain around your own neck." But I had ignored him. I thought a mother's duty was endless giving, endless sacrifice. I had believed that if I poured enough of myself into Christopher's life, he would rise, and in his success, I would finally feel whole again. Instead, I had hollowed myself out. The memories pressed in. The day I signed the deed over, handing them the keys with a trembling smile, believing we were building something together. The nights when Christopher would call me, voice low and desperate, asking for another loan, another rescue, another lifeline. And me, always saying yes, always reaching for the checkbook, the credit card, the sacrifice. I had told myself I was helping my son. But staring into that mirror now, I realized I had been enabling him to forget who he was. The pain of that realization clawed at me. Tears stung my eyes, hot and bitter. I had turned my love into chains, shackling myself to a son who no longer saw me as his mother, but as a machine that printed money. And when the machine broke, when I dared to show I was human, he cast me aside. I remembered Christmas mornings from years ago, when Christopher was a boy with tousled hair, tearing open presents while Charles and I sat by the fire. He would throw his arms around me, thanking me with pure joy in his voice. Back then, his gratitude was simple, untainted. Where had that boy gone? Or had he simply grown into the man I had allowed him to become? Someone who took and took until he forgot how to give back. My hand trembled as I reached for a framed photo I had tucked into my bag before leaving the villa. It was of Charles, taken just a year before he passed. He was smiling, his eyes kind, his hand resting on mine as though to anchor me. I held the frame close, my heart aching. "You were right," I whispered to him. I lost myself. I thought love meant never saying no. And now look at me. The tears finally spilled over, rolling down my cheeks. I let them fall, because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to hide them. Grief poured out of me, grief for the marriage I had lost, the son who no longer loved me, the life I had spent giving everything and keeping nothing for myself. But as the tears slowed, something else rose in their place, a stillness, a clarity. I set the photo back on the desk and looked into the mirror again. My face was wet, my eyes swollen, but beneath it all, I saw strength. The kind of strength that only comes from surviving heartbreak and still standing. I leaned closer to the mirror. "This isn't about money anymore," I said softly. "This is about dignity, about remembering who I am." My voice grew steadier as I spoke. "They think they broke me, but they don't know me. They don't know what I've survived." The silence in the room felt different now. Not heavy, but filled with possibility. I wiped my cheeks, sat back, and folded my hands in my lap. The weight of despair was still there, but it was no longer crushing me. It was fuel, waiting to burn. I thought of Elena's voice reminding me of the contract, reminding me I was still an owner. I thought of the frozen accounts and Christopher's panicked voice on the phone. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. "Charles," I whispered into the quiet, "I can't bring you back, but I can bring myself back, and that will be enough." The heater clicked, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the streets, muffling the world. But inside me, a fire had been lit, small, steady, but undeniable. I knew then that I would not simply survive this. I would rise from it. By the time Christmas Day dawned, the streets of Aspen glistened beneath a fresh blanket of snow. Families were bundled in coats, children dragged sleds behind them, couples walked arm in arm under twinkling lights. The world outside celebrated warmth, togetherness, and joy. Inside me, however, there was no celebration. There was only resolve. I had decided I would no longer be their quiet provider, no longer the invisible bank that held their lives together. Today, I would show them what it meant to erase me. I slipped on my boots, tied my scarf, and walked to the small cafe across from the hotel. From a corner booth, with the smell of fresh pastries filling the air, I opened my laptop. The contract for the extravagant Christmas gala sat in my inbox, signed with my name. $80,000. A night of luxury, champagne towers, and prestige they could not afford but had expected me to cover. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the cursor. Then, with a steady breath, I clicked the button. Cancel. The confirmation email came through instantly. The reservation was gone, the deposit voided. Just like that, their dream event vanished into the cold air, and with it, their illusion of control. I closed the laptop and sat back, my heart racing. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was taking the lead. Not long after, my phone rang. Christopher's voice was hoarse with panic, his words tumbling over each other. "Mom, the hotel called us. They said the gala is off. Tell me this is a mistake. Please, tell me you didn't cancel it." I lifted the phone to my ear slowly, savoring the moment. "You wanted me gone, Christopher," I said evenly. You wanted me to disappear. So I disappeared from the contract too. It was in my name, not yours. For a heartbeat, all I heard was his breath. Then came the explosion. Do you know what you've done? Guests were invited. Sponsors were promised. You've ruined us. And everyone will know. Everyone will see. His voice cracked. Daniel shouted something in the background, his tone sharp, desperate. Sophia's voice followed, shrill with fury. Their chaos poured through the line, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I let them rage. I let them feel what it was like to lose something they thought was theirs by right. When their voices finally calmed, I spoke again, my tone as cold as the snow outside. You told me the best gift would be if I disappeared. You didn't say how. I chose to vanish from the one thing holding up your image. Without me, your parties, your prestige, your entire facade collapses. Merry Christmas. I ended the call before they could respond. The silence that followed was powerful, like the stillness after a storm. I sat in that cafe with strangers all around me, sipping hot chocolate, watching their children laugh in the snow, and I felt something shift deep inside me. I was no longer just defending myself, I was striking back. Later that afternoon, as I walked through town, whispers reached my ears. 2 women passing by spoke in hushed tones. Did you hear? The Mitchell-Harper Gala was canceled at the last minute. Can you imagine the embarrassment? They were bragging about it for weeks. Another man shook his head as he walked past. Unbelievable. All that money wasted. What a disgrace. The gossip spread like fire through dry pine needles. Aspen was a small community of wealth, where reputation mattered as much as money. By nightfall, Christopher and Daniel would be the subject of ridicule, their names tied to failure instead of power. I paused in front of a shop window, the reflection of Christmas lights glowing behind me. My own reflection stared back at me, older, worn, but steadier than ever. The woman I saw was no longer the silent figure in the corner of the villa. She was someone who had seized back her place, someone who had stopped apologizing for existing. That night, as the church bells rang and families gathered around tables, I walked back to the hotel, my steps light against the snow. I thought of Charles again, of his steady hands, and the way he used to remind me that dignity was worth more than gold. I smiled faintly, whispering into the frosty air, "You were right, love. Tonight they finally felt my absence." I closed the door to my room, the noise of Aspen muffled once more. For the first time in years, I felt not like a burden, but like a force. The morning after Christmas, I awoke to the sound of pounding on my hotel door. My heart leapt, but I already knew who it would be. I slid into my robe, walked across the creaking floorboards, and opened the door. There stood Christopher, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw tight with fury. He pushed his way inside without asking. The sight of him so close again made my chest ache. My son, my only child. Yet the man who stood before me was not the boy I raised. His face was older, harder, his expression twisted by desperation. "Mom," he started, his voice sharp. "What are you doing? You've humiliated us. Do you understand? People are talking. The gala, the accounts, everything. This isn't just about money. You've made us a laughingstock." I closed the door quietly, leaned against it, and studied him. His words were full of anger, but beneath the anger, I saw something else. Fear. The kind of fear that comes when the foundation you've been standing on begins to crack. "Christopher," I said softly, "do you even hear yourself? Not once have you asked if I'm okay. Not once have you said you're sorry for throwing me out on Christmas Eve. All you care about is your image, your comfort, your money." His mouth opened, but no words came. He dropped into the chair by the small desk, his hands running through his hair. For the first time, he looked less like the powerful man he wanted the world to see, and more like the little boy who used to sit at the kitchen table, head in his hands, when he'd made a mistake. I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. "Tell me, Christopher, when was the last time you called me just to ask how I was? When was the last time you said thank you without expecting more in return? He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the window where snowflakes fell in endless silence. His jaw worked, but no sound came. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "We can't do this without you," he whispered. His voice was raw, the words dragged from him against his will. "Daniel and we don't have the money. We've been relying on you all along. If you walk away, we're finished." Hearing it spoken out loud was like a knife and a balm at the same time. Painful because it confirmed the truth I had feared. Healing because it showed me I had not been crazy, not been imagining their dependence. They had built their castle on sand, and I had been the tide holding it steady. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "Then maybe you need to fall, Christopher. Maybe you need to know what it feels like to stand on your own. I can't keep carrying you, not anymore." His eyes shot to mine, wide, wounded. "You'd let me fail? You'd let your own son fall apart?" Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I did not look away. "You let me fall apart when you nodded at Daniel's words. You let me crumble when you said I wasn't needed. Don't ask me to save you now. You've mistaken my love for weakness. But I am not weak, not anymore." The silence between us was thick, stretching like a rope pulled taut. He swallowed hard, his throat working, but he had no defense, no excuse. At last, he stood, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. "You've changed," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even recognize you." I stood too, my back straight, my voice steady. "Good. That's the point. The woman you knew, the one who gave everything and asked nothing, is gone, and what stands in her place is someone who refuses to be erased." For a long moment, we faced each other, mother and son, two lives that had once been entwined, now standing on opposite shores. Finally, he turned, yanked open the door, and disappeared into the falling snow. I sank into the chair he had left behind, my body shaking with the weight of what had just happened. My son had admitted his dependence, his weakness, his fear. And I had not bent to it. For the first time in decades, I had not given in. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the streets, muting the world. Inside, my heart pounded with something I had not felt in years. Certainty. The path ahead would not be easy, but I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The town square glowed with 1,000 lights as the evening descended. Aspen had gathered in the cold, bundled in scarves and hats, to watch the ceremonial lighting of candles around the massive Christmas tree. Children's laughter carried through the air, mingling with the sound of carols. The square was alive with warmth, with families pressing close together, holding hands, sharing cocoa. I stood on the edge of the crowd, my breath rising in faint clouds, watching it all from a distance. I hadn't planned to make a scene. I wanted only to witness the joy of strangers, to remind myself that family could exist in other forms, that love wasn't always poisoned by greed. But fate doesn't always give you the choice of when to stay silent. I felt him before I saw him, the heavy steps, the shift in the air. Then Christopher appeared, pushing through the crowd, his eyes searching until they locked on me. He was furious, his face flushed, his coat hanging open as though he had rushed here without care for the cold. People turned their heads, recognizing him immediately. The whispers began even before he reached me. "Mom!" he shouted across the snow-packed square, his voice sharp enough to cut through the carols. Heads swiveled, the music faltered, and the murmur of curiosity spread like ripples across water. He didn't care that all of Aspen was watching. He wanted the world to see me broken. He came closer, his voice rising. "You've humiliated us. You've ruined Christmas for our entire family. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what you've done?" The crowd fell silent, a circle forming around us, the candles flickering in the still air. I stood straight, my hands at my sides, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But I did not flinch. I raised my voice, steady, so everyone could hear. "You think I ruined Christmas? No, Christopher. You ruined it yourself the moment you told me I wasn't needed. The moment you looked me in the eye and nodded when your brother-in-law wished me gone." A gasp rose from the crowd, soft but unmistakable. Christopher froze, his jaw tightening. I could see the panic flash across his eyes. He hadn't expected me to speak. He hadn't expected me to answer his rage with truth. "You want to know what people are saying?" I continued, my voice sharper now, echoing across the square. "They're saying you built your life on lies, on money that wasn't yours, on a house that wouldn't stand without the sacrifices of the very woman you tried to cast aside." The whispers grew louder, the crowd shifting uneasily. Someone muttered, "That's true. I heard she paid for most of it." Another voice, "Imagine throwing your own mother out on Christmas." The murmurs swirled, wrapping around Christopher like chains. His face went pale, his hands clenched at his sides. "Stop it!" he hissed, but his voice cracked. "Voice, you're embarrassing us." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "No, Christopher. You embarrassed yourself when you forgot who raised you, who gave you everything, who stood by you when no one else would. You embarrassed yourself when you traded your mother's love for greed and silence." The crowd fell into stunned quiet. The carolers had stopped singing. All that remained was the sound of the wind rustling through the tree and the weight of truth hanging in the air. For the first time, I saw my son falter. He looked around at the faces turned toward him, neighbors, acquaintances, people who had once admired him. Their eyes were no longer filled with respect. They were filled with judgment, disappointment, pity. He took a step back, his voice trembling now. "You don't understand. You've always made me feel small. You've always controlled everything." I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. "No, Christopher. I lifted you higher than I ever lifted myself. And in return you asked me to vanish. Well, here I am, not vanished but standing where everyone can see who you really are." The words hung in the air like a final bell tolling. He tried to speak again, but nothing came. His mouth opened, then closed. He turned sharply, pushing through the crowd, his head bent low, his coat trailing behind him. The whispers followed him as he fled, whispers that would cling to him long after the candles burned out. I stood still, my heart racing, the sting of tears threatening my eyes. But I held them back. I would not let them see me cry. Not tonight. Tonight, the truth had been spoken out loud. Around me, the crowd slowly resumed its chatter, though their eyes lingered on me with something new, something that looked like respect. I pulled my scarf tighter, turned away from the glowing tree, and walked into the snowy night. The night after the confrontation in the square was quieter than I expected. I had thought I might feel triumphant, vindicated, even free. Instead, there was a hollowness inside me, like the echo of a church bell after it stops ringing. The truth had been spoken in front of everyone, yes, but truth alone doesn't silence enemies. It stirs them. It was late when the call came. A number I didn't recognize lit up my phone. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, clipped, professional. "This is the Aspen Police Department. We've received a report concerning your mental state. Allegations have been made that you're unstable, possibly unfit to make financial decisions. We'll need to meet with you to review the claims." My blood ran cold. I didn't need to ask who filed the report. I could almost see Christopher's desperate face, Daniel's sly whisper in his ear. If they couldn't control me with guilt, they would try to strip me of my competence. If they couldn't silence me with shame, they would attempt to paint me as unwell. I agreed to meet, my voice steady though my hands shook as I hung up the phone. Afterward, I sat at the small hotel desk, staring at the papers I had carried with me. Bank statements, ownership documents, letters from Charles's estate. Every page told the story of a woman who was capable, clear, and far from delusional. And yet, the fear still pressed heavy on my chest. What if people believed them? What if the story they spun became the one that stuck? The next morning, Detective Ramirez came. He wasn't what I expected, not cold or dismissive, but observant, calm. He sat across from me in the hotel lobby, notebook in hand. "I'll need to ask you some questions," he said. "Of course," I replied. My voice was firmer than I felt. He asked about the accounts, the property, my decisions over the last year. I answered clearly, without hesitation. I explained the contracts, the transfers, the moment I chose to freeze the accounts. I spoke of the humiliation at the villa, the confrontation in the square. He listened without interruption, his pen moving quickly. At last he closed the notebook. His gaze held mine, steady and certain. "Mrs. Mitchell, forgive me for saying this bluntly, but you seem more lucid and determined than most people I interview. Whatever allegations your family made, I see no evidence of instability. What I see is a woman who knows exactly what she's doing." Relief flooded me so fast I nearly wept. I pressed a hand to my chest, nodding slowly. "Thank you," I whispered. But the relief was tempered with something else. Fury. My own son had tried to erase me not just from his home, but from my own mind, from my own identity. He wanted me declared incapable, powerless. He wanted me stripped of the last dignity I possessed. When Detective Ramirez left, I sat back in the armchair, the weight of it all pressing in. The humiliation, the betrayal, the audacity of their lies. It was almost too much to carry. I pressed my palms into my eyes, fighting the sting of tears. For a moment I wanted to crumble, to let the despair wash me away. But then I remembered the look on Christopher's face in the square, the way he had faltered under the weight of truth. I remembered the way the crowd had turned, whispering, their respect shifting away from him and toward me, and I knew this was not the time to give in. I rose from the chair, walked to the window, and looked out over the snowy town. The lights twinkled, the streets quiet. Somewhere out there, Christopher and Daniel were plotting their next move. But so was I. I whispered into the glass, my breath fogging the pain. "You will not break me. Not in my home. Not in my mind. Not ever." The silence of the room wrapped around me. Heavy. Lonely. But inside the silence, my resolve hardened further. If they wanted a fight, they would have it. Only this time, it would be on my terms. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the small chair by the hotel window, the glow of Aspen's Christmas lights flickering across the snow outside. Families were still out, walking arm in arm, their laughter muffled by the glass. I pressed my forehead against the cool window pane and let my thoughts pour out into the quiet. How had it come to this? How had the bond between a mother and her only son turned into this battlefield of accusations, lies, and humiliation? I remembered the night he was born, how small he was, how tightly he gripped my finger, as if he knew I was his entire world. I remembered staying awake through fevers, sitting through school plays, cheering louder than anyone at his college graduation. I remembered how proud I was, how I thought all the sacrifices were worth it. And now he looked at me not as a mother, not even as a person, but as an obstacle, a burden, a wallet that had finally run dry. Tears filled my eyes again, hot and unrelenting. "How did we end up here, Charles?" I whispered, as though my late husband could hear me in the silence. "How did our son forget the love that raised him?" My voice cracked, and the tears rolled freely down my cheeks. For a moment, I let myself cry, let myself feel the crushing weight of loss that went deeper than money or property. This wasn't just about the villa or the accounts. This was about love turned cold, about blood that had betrayed me. I looked down at my trembling hands, old and lined, hands that had cooked, cleaned, held, given, and given again. I thought of the years I had poured into making sure Christopher never went without, and now those same hands were empty, cast aside, unwanted. But then another thought rose, fierce and unyielding. If I didn't fight, if I accepted this humiliation, then I truly would vanish. I would become the ghost they wanted me to be, fading from my own story. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and sat up straighter. No, that would not be my ending. I whispered into the quiet, steady now. If I don't face them, if I don't stand tall, then I disappear forever. And I refuse to disappear. The words echoed in my chest, stronger each time I said them. I refuse to disappear. Outside, the snow fell heavier, each flake catching the light before it vanished into the dark. I watched it, imagining each flake as a piece of myself, fragile but countless, unstoppable when gathered together. I wasn't alone. Not really. I had Elena. I had the truth. And above all, I still had myself. I pressed my hand to the glass, the cold seeping into my skin. "Tomorrow," I said softly. "Tomorrow I stop surviving. Tomorrow I fight to win." In that quiet, something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had turned into resolve, a steel edge beneath my sorrow. I knew now that the war was not only for property or respect. It was for my very right to exist with dignity. As the clock struck midnight, I closed my eyes and drew a long breath. My heart was tired, yes, but it was also ready. The next morning, the sky over Aspen was gray, heavy with clouds that promised more snow. I dressed with care, choosing a dark wool coat Charles had once bought me, the one that always made me feel taller. Today was not about hiding. Today was about standing face to face with the son who had tried to erase me. I met Elena at her office, a warm building tucked between the courthouse and the bank. She was already waiting, papers spread neatly across the polished wooden table. When I stepped inside, she looked up and gave me a reassuring nod. "Are you ready, Constance?" she asked. My hands trembled slightly as I removed my gloves, but my voice was steady. "Yes, I've been ready for longer than I realized." Minutes later, Christopher arrived with Daniel trailing behind him. Sophia didn't come, perhaps too embarrassed to face me after the disaster of the gala. Christopher looked worn, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. Daniel, on the other hand, still carried his arrogance like a shield, his eyes cold, his jaw set. Elena gestured for us all to sit. She folded her hands and began calmly. "We're here to settle ownership issues regarding the Aspen Villa. Constance holds 35% of the property. The question is how to move forward in a way that resolves this conflict." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Christopher's eyes darted to mine, full of desperation, but also resentment. "Mom," he began, his voice rough, "please, don't do this. We can fix things. Just give us time." I shook my head slowly. "You had time, Christopher. Years of it. I gave, and all I asked was respect. Instead, you laughed as they told me to disappear. You nodded when Daniel said the best gift was my absence. Respect doesn't grow back once it's cut down." His face tightened, the plea in his eyes giving way to anger. "Then what do you want? Do you want us homeless? Do you want us ruined?" I leaned forward, my voice firm and unyielding. "What I want is justice. You have two choices. Buy my share or sell the villa entirely. 35% is mine, and you will not take that from me." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Daniel slammed his hand against the table, his voice rising. "This is insane. You can't tear apart your own family over a house." I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. "It's not just a house. It's every sacrifice I ever made. It's every night I went without so you could live in luxury. Don't you dare call it just a house." Christopher's hands shook as he gripped the arms of his chair. He looked at Elena, then back at me, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, if you take this from us, we have nothing left." For the first time, I felt a pang deep in my chest, the faint echo of love that refused to die even under betrayal. But I didn't let it soften me. "Christopher," I said gently, "you had everything because of me. Without me, there would be no villa, no image to uphold, no life of comfort. If you want to keep it, you'll pay me what I am owed. If you can't, you'll sell it. Either way, I am no longer invisible." His eyes filled with tears, though he blinked them back quickly. He was trapped, cornered by the truth he could no longer deny. Daniel muttered curses under his breath, but even he could see the walls closing in. Elena slid the papers across the table, her pen clicking sharply. "It's simple," she said. "Decide now. Purchase Constance's share at fair market value or agree to list the property for sale. The law is on her side." I sat back, my hands folded calmly in my lap. For once, I wasn't the one begging. I wasn't the one explaining or justifying. The power was mine, and they knew it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence as Christopher stared at the papers. His hands trembled, his lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself, "Without her, we are nothing." The words pierced me, but I didn't let them see the pain. I kept my face steady, my eyes unyielding. I had waited my whole life to be recognized, not as a burden, but as the foundation of everything they had. The air inside Elena's office grew heavy, as though the walls themselves were listening. Christopher's shoulders slumped, his hands covering his face, and for the first time, I saw him stripped of all the arrogance he had worn like armor. His voice cracked through his fingers. "We can't afford this. We can't even keep up with the bills as it is. The credit cards are maxed, the loans are piling up. Without you, we're drowning." Daniel shifted uneasily beside him, his jaw tightening. "Don't say that out loud," he snapped, his eyes darting toward Elena, who was scribbling notes without expression. But the damage was done. The truth was spilling into the room like water from a burst dam, impossible to contain. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Then you will have to learn to swim. I will not rescue you again." Christopher's hands dropped, his eyes wet now, his face pale. "Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I wanted to become a man who leans on his mother like a child? I never wanted it. But you made it so easy, Mom. You gave and gave until I forgot how to stand, and now you hate me for it." His words struck me deep, but not in the way he intended. They were not an excuse. They were a confession. For the first time, he admitted the truth, that my endless sacrifices had chained us both. I shook my head slowly, my throat tight. "I don't hate you, Christopher. I hate what you've become. I hate that you let greed blind you to love. I hate that you nodded when Daniel said the best gift was my disappearance. But more than anything, I hate that you chose this path, because it was a choice. Don't you dare lay that at my feet." Daniel slammed his hand against the table again, his voice rising with frustration. "Enough of this. If you force the sale, we lose everything. Do you really want to destroy your own family just to prove a point?" I turned to him, my gaze steady. "I didn't destroy this family, Daniel. You did the moment you opened your mouth on Christmas Eve, and Christopher did, when he agreed. I'm not destroying anything. I'm reclaiming myself." The room fell silent. Christopher's breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling like a man on the edge of collapse. His lips trembled as he whispered, "You don't understand. If you do this, everyone will see me for what I am, a failure." The word hung between us, heavy, undeniable. I felt the sting of tears, but I did not let them fall. My voice was firm, carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every humiliation. You became a failure the day you decided to betray the person who loved you most, not because of money, not because of the villa, but because you chose selfishness over gratitude. That was the moment you failed, Christopher. Not now, then. His eyes closed, a tear slipping down his cheek despite his effort to hold it back. He looked smaller in that chair than he ever had before. Daniel shifted, restless, unwilling to meet my eyes. Elena slid another document across the table, her voice breaking the silence. "These are the terms. 30 days to resolve the debt or agree to the sale. Sign here to acknowledge." Christopher picked up the pen with shaking hands. He hovered over the paper, his breath catching. Then he lowered his head and scribbled his name, his tears falling onto the ink as he did. I sat back, my heart aching, but resolute. The son I loved was crumbling before me, but this had to happen. Only by facing the truth could he ever hope to rebuild himself. As the pen dropped from his hand, the sound echoed in the still room like the closing of a door. I folded my hands, whispering silently to myself, "It's over. The mask is gone." The villa was quiet when I returned that evening. The snow outside had thickened, blanketing the roof and muffling the world in silence. Inside, the trees still glittered with ornaments, its lights reflecting off the polished floor. The smell of pine and candle wax filled the air. I stood at the threshold, my boots leaving damp marks on the rug, and I knew this would be the last time I entered this house as the woman they thought they could erase. Christopher was there, sitting stiffly by the fireplace. His face was pale, drawn, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. Daniel leaned against the mantel, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but his jaw tight. A single box sat under the tree, wrapped in red paper, a golden ribbon tied neatly around it. It was the only present left unopened, and it was mine. I walked across the room slowly, each step echoing in the silence. My heels clicked against the floorboards, the sound louder than my heartbeat. I stopped by the tree and gestured toward the box. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Open it." Christopher hesitated. His hands trembled as he reached for the gift, the ribbon slipping loose beneath his fingers. He tore the paper away, and the room seemed to shrink as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a crisp envelope, stark against the red velvet lining. He opened it, and the color drained from his face. It was the notice of intent to sell, my 35% ownership of the villa, a legal declaration that the house they called theirs could vanish in 30 days. Tucked beside it was a single note in my handwriting. Christopher read it aloud, his voice breaking as the words filled the air. "The real Christmas gift is truth." The paper shook in his hands. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Daniel reached over, snatching the envelope, scanning it quickly, his face twisting with rage. "You wouldn't dare!" he spat, his voice low and venomous. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on his. "Wouldn't I? You told me to disappear. You wished me gone. And now you see what it means when I vanish, from your accounts, from your contracts, from this house you thought was yours." Christopher's knees buckled, and he sank into the armchair, the envelope slipping from his fingers. His chest rose and fell in sharp gasps, his eyes glassy with disbelief. For the first time, the weight of his choices crushed him fully. Daniel muttered curses, pacing, his fists clenched at his sides. But he couldn't undo what was written on that page. The law was mine now, the villa's fate was mine. And they knew it. I stood tall, the glow of the tree bathing me in soft light. "You wanted me gone, but what you never understood is that I was the foundation. Without me, this house is nothing but walls and glass. Without me, your lives collapse." Silence followed, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. Christopher pressed his face into his hands, his shoulders shaking. For once, it wasn't me crying. It was him. I looked at him, my son, my blood, and felt a surge of sorrow, sharp and piercing. But beneath it was something stronger, something unyielding. This was not cruelty. This was justice. This was the truth they had tried to bury, now laid bare beneath the Christmas tree for all to see. The lights twinkled overhead, ornaments shimmering as though mocking the moment. It should have been a scene of joy. Instead, it was a reckoning. I turned toward the door, my hand resting on the frame. I glanced back once, my voice quiet but steady. "The gift you asked for is here. I've disappeared. From your control, from your lies. And now you'll live with the truth." Then I stepped out into the snow, leaving the villa glowing behind me, its warmth no longer mine to claim. But the power I carried with me was greater than any hearth. The snow crunched under my boots as I left the villa that night, the air sharp with the scent of pine and smoke from distant chimneys. My heart was heavy, but my steps were steady. I had delivered the truth into their hands, and now the weight was theirs to carry. Mine was gone. The next morning, Elena called me to her office. Papers were ready, drafted with precision, the language clear and binding. 30 days. That was the deadline for Christopher and Daniel. Either pay me what was owed for my share or agree to sell the villa. I sat across from her as she slid the documents over, the pen gleaming under the desk lamp. "They'll have no choice," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "The law is on your side, Constance. This is your victory. Now it's just a matter of whether they face it with dignity or drag it through the mud." I nodded, though my chest ached. Victory didn't taste sweet the way I thought it might. It was bitter, laced with the sorrow of a family broken beyond repair. Still, I pressed the pen to paper and signed, my hand steady, my signature bold. Later that day, Christopher came. He didn't knock loudly this time. He stood in the doorway of Elena's office, his eyes rimmed red, his face pale. Daniel lingered behind him, silent, his usual arrogance gone. They both looked smaller than I had ever seen them. Christopher stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Mom, please don't do this. We'll pay. We'll find a way. Just give us a little more time." I met his eyes, the same eyes I had once wiped tears from when he scraped his knees as a boy. My heart twisted, but I didn't falter. "You have 30 days, I said firmly. "No more. You asked me to disappear, Christopher. Now I've done it. From your finances, from your contracts, from the shadow you thought I would always live in. The villa is not yours alone, and you will finally face the cost of everything you've taken for granted." He swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he reached for the papers Elena handed him. His tears fell freely now, dropping onto the signature lines as he scrawled his name. Daniel stood stiffly, jaw clenched, silent, as though words had finally abandoned him. When it was done, Christopher sank into the chair, his head in his hands. He was a man undone, stripped of the illusions he had clung to. I stood, gathering my coat around me, my voice calm. "This is not punishment. It's a reckoning, and it's long overdue." The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the scratching of Elena's pen as she finalized the copies. I turned toward the door, but before I left, I looked back once more at my son. He didn't look up. His shoulders shook with the weight of his shame, his tears darkening the paper he had just signed. As I stepped outside, the cold air filled my lungs, crisp and sharp, cleansing in a way. For the first time in years, I felt taller, lighter. The power no longer sat in their hands. It was in mine. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. Its flame flickered against the glass, a small but steady light in the darkness. I thought of Charles, of his wisdom, of his warning never to lose myself in love. I whispered softly, "I found my way back, love. I found myself again." And as the candle burned, I knew that no matter what happened with the villa, no matter what choices Christopher made in the days ahead, I had already won. I had reclaimed my dignity. 6 months later, the chill of winter had melted into the soft warmth of summer in Aspen. The mountains were no longer capped with white, but with deep green forests, the rivers swelling with the melt of snow. I had traded the grandeur of the villa for a modest apartment in a senior community overlooking the town. It wasn't lavish, but it was mine. The walls were filled with books, photographs of Charles, and new memories made with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. Most afternoons I walked down the hall to the book club, where laughter echoed from a circle of well-worn armchairs. Frederick, with his gentle humor and patient eyes, always saved me a seat. We read aloud, debated characters, and sometimes simply shared stories of our lives, stories of love, loss, and starting over. For the first time in decades, I felt surrounded not by obligation, but by choice. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my chest tighten, Christopher. My thumb hovered over the answer button, my heart torn between old pain and the faint thread of hope. Finally, I pressed it. "Mom," his voice came softly, almost timid. "I wanted to tell you. We sold the villa. We had no choice. But we're trying to start fresh. I've taken a job. Sophia's learning how to budget. It's hard, but we're doing it. And I wanted to ask, would you come to dinner sometime? Not at a villa, not at a party, just us, at a cafe, neutral ground." I closed my eyes, the ache of love and sorrow mingling in my chest. For months I had prepared myself never to hear his voice again, never to have this moment. Yet here it was, fragile and real. "Yes," I said softly, "I'll come. But not at your house, Christopher. Not in the shadows of what was broken. We'll meet where people gather, where it's open, where honesty can't hide." There was a pause, then a shaky laugh. "I understand. Thank you, Mom." Thank. When the call ended, I sat for a long while, staring at the fading sunlight spilling across my floor. My heart was heavy with everything lost, but lighter with the knowledge that perhaps, not forgiveness, but growth, was possible. Later that week, I met him at a small cafe downtown. He was already seated when I arrived, looking older, thinner, his eyes humbled in a way I hadn't seen before. He stood as I approached, his movements awkward, unsure. But when he said, "Hi, Mom," it wasn't laced with entitlement or demand. It was simple, human. We sat, and for the first time in years, we spoke, not as a provider and a dependent, not as combatants in a war over money, but as two people trying to find their way back to truth. As I sipped my coffee, I thought of Charles, of that Christmas Eve, of every tear and every choice that had led me here. And I realized something. The greatest gift I had ever given my son was not money, not a house, not years of sacrifice. It was the chance to face himself, to stand on his own, to rebuild. When the meal ended and we parted ways, I didn't follow him home. I walked back to my small apartment, where Frederick was waiting with the book club's next selection, where laughter and warmth awaited me. I had my own life now, my own home, my own freedom. I looked up at the night sky, the stars scattered across it like tiny sparks of hope, and I smiled. "The greatest gift I give now," I whispered to myself, "is to live fully, without chains, and to let love, if it returns, be love, not obligation." And in that moment I knew. I hadn't just survived, I had been reborn.